A very good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this, the HEAD Foundation's 5th Making Headway series, Teaching STEM in Southeast Asia. We all know that science, technology, engineering, mathematics, commonly known as STEM, is an important part of our education system, especially an education system that seeks to equip today's graduates and students with the skills needed to ensure not just gainful, but meaningful employment in the future. STEM subjects have often been a basis of which many countries have sought economic development and prosperity. The importance of STEM is certainly there when one looks at it from an economic angle. Yet STEM is much more than just a means of ensuring economic development. STEM, its constituent subjects, but importantly, the skills that it helps our students pick up, can see them through a life where they can not just find gainful employment, but be meaningful members of society, contributing back to where they come from. So ladies and gentlemen, we're really happy to organize this, our 5th Making Headway series, a practitioner-focused series that hopes to share with you, our esteemed audience, best practices from around the region on how educators have introduced STEM into their classrooms, how they've transformed STEM pedagogy and leadership practices in their schools, and how schools can establish and leverage networks within the community and with industries to strengthen STEM teaching practices. I would also like to share with you a little bit about a Facebook learning group that we launched sometime not too long ago, Teaching, Leading, and Learning. You'll find a link to this Facebook group dropped in our chat box later during this session. Now, the Facebook group was created to provide you, our audience, and also our panelists, moderators, to be able to continue the conversations that we have during these sessions. Unfortunately, constrained by time, we are not able to answer all the questions or engage in as rich a discussion as we would like. So please do feel free to use the platform, use the Facebook group to continue to communicate, ask your questions, but very importantly, share your own experiences. This whole series, Making Headway, is founded on educators sharing their best practices with each other and learning from one another. So continue that in the Facebook social learning group, Teaching, Leading, Learning. You'll also find that we have some things installed for the later part of this year. So follow us on that group and you will know more about what the Foundation has in store as it looks to scale up its Making Headway program. I'd also like to quickly touch on the certificates of attendance that will be issued to those who request for one at the end of this series. This is a 3-part series, and today is our first session. If you wish to receive a certificate of attendance, please note that you must have registered and attended via Zoom for all 3 sessions. So please ensure that you do so, and we will put a link to request for a certificate of attendance at the end of the 3rd session. Those of you who are watching us on Facebook, if you wish to receive the certificate of attendance, please do register and log into the Zoom page. We still have some seats available. We are not able, unfortunately, to track those who are attending on other platforms, especially Facebook. So please attend through Zoom. So ladies and gentlemen, today we start the first in our 3-part series of Teaching STEM in Southeast Asia. Today's session, we look at Applying STEM Pedagogies. And importantly, it is my great pleasure to introduce our moderator for this series, an esteemed scholar, Dr. Frederick Talaue. He's an associate professor at the Department of Science Education in the Salle University in the Philippines. He's also a consultant for the Center for Integrated STEM Education Incorporated. So ladies and gentlemen, I'll hand the floor over to Dr. Frederick, who will moderate today and our upcoming 2 sessions. Dr. Frederick, please.
Thank you very much, Vignesh. And I am honored to have been invited by the HEAD Foundation to moderate this session, the sessions in the Making Headway webinar series on teaching STEM in Southeast Asia. Good afternoon to everyone, and a very warm welcome to you. We're glad that you have joined us today for our very first session of the series. Allow me to talk briefly about the series. Our conversations will focus on STEM, or science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education. This is not a new concept. In fact, it is still in its infancy in many Southeast Asian classrooms. Many questions about STEM education come up in our conversations with teachers, practitioners in the field, and we hope to address some of these many questions in our limited time together. STEM education can play a key role in developing future-ready students to thrive in a fast-changing world. STEM education goes beyond content knowledge and aims to develop the necessary skills and identities for learners to thrive in rapidly changing communities, workplaces, and the global economy. Our aim for this three-part webinar series is to share ideas on how we educators can start small and introduce bite-sized STEM teaching practices in our classrooms. We will also share ideas on how schools can establish and leverage networks with the community and industry to strengthen STEM education practices. We will focus on relevant, actionable strategies and tips for educators to adapt to their own context. And we hope that these conversations would trigger reflections on what might work in your particular classrooms and schools. So we can kick off the series today with session 1 on applying STEM pedagogies. For this first session, we have 3 speakers who will share some lesson and assessment ideas. They will share their stories about teaching innovations that integrate across STEM disciplines. We are joined today by 2 speakers from the Philippines, Dr. Ariel Babierra and Mr. Leo Crisologo. We also have with us Mr. David Chak from Malaysia. At the outset, we would like to thank our speakers for their generosity of time and effort for their presentations. We will hear more about them and from them later. I hope you have also registered for our session 2 on March 17, next Thursday, on developing and supporting STEM teachers. Our speakers will share their thoughts on the question, how can we improve enactment of STEM pedagogies? The last session for the series, session 3, will be on creating a STEM ecosystem. This is an important discussion because we will be talking about the social support that might be required to develop and nurture critical thinkers, problem solvers, and innovators. So we asked the question, how can we support the students to learn and practice STEM? So this is the scope of our webinar series. We will move from the microsystems of pedagogies, teaching and learning, and then to mesosystems of teacher support, and then macrosystems to educational networks to support STEM education. All right, we have a bit of an activity to engage everyone. We have created a poll on just one question. And so you have this question on your screen right now. We encourage you to answer this question. Which question is most challenging to you in designing STEM learning experiences? So the first option is, who are my learners? Right. Second, what material resources do I access for teaching? Third, what is my goal in teaching STEM? And lastly, how do I integrate core ideas from various disciplines? Okay, this might be a difficult question to to answer, but we would appreciate your participation and your honesty in answering this question. We will go back to your answers to this question when we go to the Q&A after our panelists present their ideas and stories. Okay, so do we have people answering, taking this call already? I hope you are all right. So just a reminder, as you answer this question, we will also have our Q&A, as I mentioned. This Q&A, for this Q&A, we will entertain the questions that you will write in our Q&A box. So I see that some have already put in their questions, and I encourage you to write your questions for this Q&A. Right? Okay, so allow me to share some thoughts with you as a way of setting the stage for our discussion this afternoon. So just very briefly, I want to share a bit of my story and also provide you with some pointers for our reflection this afternoon, for our conversations this afternoon. So the STEM movement, it's been about 3 decades since the STEM movement started. And it began in the 1990s in the US. And I started my teaching career in 1996 at the Philippine Science High School. Back then, I didn't think of myself as a STEM teacher. I was simply a biology teacher and a research teacher teaching a special science curriculum. We thought of our learners as gifted and exceptional because that was in vogue at that time. We use these terms to refer to learners who are highly competent in science and math. While aware of this kind of elitist position our school held, it was clear that we were educating our scholars for nation building and consequently economic development. This was the primary motivation for the establishment of the school in the 1960s. The Philippines needed scientists, mathematicians, and engineers who love their country and will help spur its economic competitiveness. That was the mission and vision of the school. By the time that I left PSHS, or Philippine Science High School, in 2009 to pursue my graduate studies, the idea of STEM was becoming widespread. It has migrated to Asia. It has entered our educational discourse. And we were asking questions like, does teaching STEM mean we teach STEM as a standalone subject? Does teaching STEM mean we just continue teaching the disciplines concurrently at the same time? Do we teach the disciplines in a combined way? If we are to teach STEM in a combined way, does it mean we blend all 4 STEM disciplines, or could we do the blending pairwise or in threes? What's the optimal number for blending the STEM disciplines? The debate continues about the essence and form of STEM education. So if we ask ourselves the question, what is the best way to teach STEM? For sure, we will run into a lot more discussions. This is a difficult question to answer, but we certainly have dimensions of STEM pedagogies that will figure in this discussion. Why pedagogies? We use a term to convey the reality that teaching and learning are tightly coupled. While this session we will be talking about teaching strategies, we will also pay attention to how students learn STEM. We are also concerned about integration. Again, integration is a hot topic in discussions on STEM education. Integration does not only mean, as I mentioned earlier, interdisciplinarity or transdisciplinarity. When we talk about integration, we may also mean bringing in existing approaches such as problem-based learning, project-based learning, inquiry-based learning, etc., into our toolkits as STEM teachers. Integration may also mean asking, how do I make teaching more relevant to what's happening in the world today? Do I bring in the needs of my local community or the global community? Do we bring in to STEM art or agriculture? Lastly, we are concerned about the aims of STEM education. The predominant discourse is that we teach STEM to build 21st century competencies, to train the future workforce to sustain global economies. This has been criticized in recent years as utilitarian and instrumentalist values for economic growth and productivity. And so also in recent years, we have already begun talking about humanistic values in STEM education or for STEM education. Can STEM also address issues related to scientific literacy for society and even social justice? So I know that's a lot to think about. So let's just start small this afternoon. Let me offer some reflection points as you join in the conversations with our speakers. Here is just a very basic guide on how we can think about pedagogical approaches for STEM. So first is adaptation. How is this STEM pedagogy approach or the strategy adapted to my context? How can I adapt it to my context? What are the essential features of this pedagogy? What principles can I use to design learning environments or learning opportunities for my students? And then we also talk about, how do I know that my students are learning? So we talk about assessment and what evidence can we gather that they are learning what we aim or intend for them to learn. And lastly, what are outcomes of learners' engagement with our STEM teaching? Are they understanding concepts better? Are they also developing as persons? And so just these 4 ideas of adaptation, design principles, assessment, and outcomes, they might be useful points to think about while you listen in and join the conversation this afternoon, not only this afternoon, but throughout this webinar series. Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker for today, our first panelist. We have Dr. Ariel L. Babierra. He is an associate professor of mathematics at the Institute of Mathematical Sciences and Physics at the University of the Philippines in Los Baños. He obtained his PhD in mathematics from the University of the Philippines in Diliman with specialization in approximation theory. His work includes chairing curriculum and instruction committees for mathematics and applied mathematics programs, and coordinating general education course on mathematics, culture, and society. So he will be offering ideas about enhancing soft core skills in teaching mathematics and STEM. I will now pass the time to Ariel for his presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Frederick, for that introduction. Okay, good day. I hope you are well and healthy. Allow me in the next 10 minutes to share my experiences in incorporating soft skill activities in mathematics classes. I will also give bits on how this can be done in other STEM subjects. But first, let me introduce our university. The University of the Philippines Los Baños, or UPLB, is part of a system of 8 constituent universities in 17 campuses across the Philippines. Our campus is nestled in the mystic Mount Makiling. The flagship programs are in agriculture, biology, and forestry, but then we also have degree programs in engineering, physical and natural sciences, economics, humanities, communications, and of course, mathematics and applied mathematics. With its location and diverse programs, the campus is conducive for collaborative works. And what I will share to you this afternoon is part of our efforts to integrate mathematics in various areas of studies and incorporate soft skill activities in soft skill class activities. Sorry for that. Before 2018, the GE math courses in UPLB and the UP system were technical and very focused, in this case, mathematical skills, being quantitative reasoning and problem solving. With the adoption of the K-12 curriculum in the Philippines, the GE courses were revised to be multi-inter-transdisciplinary with focus on lifelong learning and core skills. Math 10 is a GE course. It is actually just an elective GE course. The idea is to relate mathematics with culture, society, and the different disciplines. You can immediately see from the course outcomes, the focus is more on core rather than technical skills. And even the final requirement for the course is a creative or a sort of research project. Of course, inspired by mathematics that they can relate in their own, the students can relate in their own fields. We get around 800 students per semester, and it is being handled by 20 professors, about probably 30 sections. A shout out, of course, to the UPLB Math 10 team who have been cooperative and collaborative in designing and improving the course. In Math 10, we get to introduce mathematical modeling. We use mathematical modeling as a framework of using mathematics in understanding real-world phenomena and addressing real-world problems. Now, this really extends beyond mathematics. Solutions to certain problems can be impractical, difficult, or impossible. A mathematical model provides an abstract representation of that problem or a part of that problem. We then scrutinize the equations, functions, graphs, simulations, and then after careful evaluation and validation, the hope is we get to contribute to a solution. In Math 10, even students from non-STEM backgrounds get to appreciate the topic. We cover models from a wide range of disciplines, voting systems, games and conflicts, the stock market, music and harmony, communication, human and animal behaviors, just to name a few. In fact, when the COVID-19 pandemic struck, we got to introduce mathematical models in epidemiology, disease transmission, and vaccination. STEM skills are often viewed as technical skills that relate to, of course, STEM disciplines. The soft or core skills serve as a foundation to build STEM and other life skills. However, in reverse, we can also use our STEM classrooms to enhance soft core skills. By incorporating STEM in soft skill activities, students will have a wider perspective that STEM extends beyond the subject and towards all disciplines and professions. I will be showing you some suggestions from my experience. I hope you get to incorporate some of these in your own classrooms. Here's the first, creativity. Creativity is a key. There is always room for creativity. In fact, creativity brings out the best not only from our students, but also from us, the teachers. I am showing you some pre-pandemic output from 2 of my classes. The one on the left are comic strip projects from a Math 10 class. With comic strips, students were able to incorporate story elements to an otherwise would have been a poster project. Now going to a technical. On my part, the biggest effect of handling a GE math course is in how it affected me handling major math courses. You can see that on the right. This is what we call as Meme Friday. It is for a complex analysis class that is usually taken by junior or senior students. I ask my students to explain memes about complex numbers and complex functions. Now, you can also definitely do this in your own class. Definitely, whatever field you are in, there are lots of memes there. And I think you will have lots of fun discussing that in your class. Here are some final projects. These are pre-pandemic projects. And then I will show you now some project submissions that we got in the last 2 years within the pandemic. We also got short videos and song compositions. One of the best projects I got from this group of 3 students is a website about patterns in woven textiles from the Cordillera region in the Philippines. They even attempted to do simple crystallographic analysis. With creativity, we would not have received such interesting projects if we opted for a more objective type final assessments. Next is about relevance. Beyond creativity, what they're going to do needs to be relevant. Relevance does not have to be life-changing or impactful. Activities can be relevant by just providing context. In measurement topics, we can have activities that relate with everyday objects, even objects at home. Students can then even verify if their computed values are the same as what is being printed or shown in the product, or perhaps perform real-world measurements. Pre-pandemic, I asked a group of students to get a volume of an empty pool near the front gate of our campus. They actually measured the dimension using tape measures. Unknowingly then, I assigned this to a group of communication students. Students with a background is really not from STEM. And they were enthusiastic when they reported their experience in class. Other groups were asked to measure height of a tower, perimeter of a running oval, and other locations in the campus. You can also do this in your own classes. Ask your students to measure floor or lot area in their own homes. Or once classes resume on campus, you can probably do this also. More about relevance. You can also give relevance to a topic by providing cultural context or in terms of social heritage or probably popular culture or even day-to-day activities. Here are some ideas. Scientific names of local flora and fauna. Ratios and proportions in baking recipes, vague chemical ingredients in grocery items, or even do interview with local STEM practitioners. And this interview can be done beyond a STEM class, probably an English class, and then they do a write-up about it. Another one about relevance. Instead of giving a single common item, of course, I'm not suggesting that you do this every time. In some, you can give a single item, but in some cases, you can have students find problems that relate more to them, more authentic in their own experiences. Here, instead of giving a single argument for students to scrutinize, we ask students to get their own examples from popular media. This simulates how they will encounter arguments in their real life. With fake news and alternative truths, they should be equipped, our students should be equipped and confident to examine and judge on their own. And that's a nice thing about STEM. STEM provides a platform for examination of truths. The next one, creativity, relevance. The next one is about being wrong. There is a perception that mathematics and the whole of STEM is heavily reliant on correct answers. Of course, in a research laboratory, doing wrong is harmful. In a workplace, a wrong computation can be disastrous. But then one realization, and I think you can agree, with me on this one. Our classrooms are in fact safe spaces. We can guide our students to face the wrong, realizing the wrong, admitting the wrong, then rising above it. We can serve as their guide. And outside, we hope that they will be brave enough to face the wrongs on their own. Towards this, you can do this a simple activity in giving feedback. Rather than immediately marking errors and giving final scores, make the activities and assessments collaborative. You give a chance for the students to give a feedback before you give the final score. Give comments and suggestions. Allow students to improve. Value progress over correctness. Now, this will actually take a bit of effort, but then it's a good collaboration works with your students. And this also extends to our scoring systems. Sorry. Okay. We can incorporate scores for presentation, organization, and creativity, even in our STEM classes, and of course, also in other disciplines. You can show this to your students at the onset. Instead of giving full points for correctness, we can encourage students to do better construction of sentences, properly formatting their submissions, and of course, introducing bits of creativity and ingenuity. Lastly, for now, always allow time and space for reflection. Instead of ending a class with a take-home exercise or an assignment, why not once in a while ask a question for reflection or an easy soft research? And this should also extend to us, the teachers. After every activity, have a short reflection time. I think Frederick a while ago also showed some reflection things that we can do as we go through today's program. Let me end with some quick tips. My first one is collaborate. Collaborate not only with co-teachers in the same subject, collaborate with practitioners from a wider field. And of course, in a classroom and outside that, collaborate with your students. Next, incorporate your own interests and experiences. Your own difficulties can help students in their own predicaments. My hobbies include reading high fantasy novels and playing role-playing games. Once in a while, I can't help it, but just be a nerd in class and really discuss fantasy and role-playing games. And surprisingly, I can somehow introduce this in a mathematics topic. And then lastly, go beyond STEM. STEM is a framework to understand the world around us. STEM should not be confined within STEM. And I think there are already hints and I think you also will agree with me with this on this one. All disciplines and professions should have STEM elements in the same manner that STEM should have elements from other disciplines. STEM provides not only technical know-how, STEM provides methodologies to discern truths and falsities, what is wrong, what is right, and which is fake or authentic. And that is very important these days. We can open our classrooms to other disciplines and incorporate contemporary / 21st century / fourth industrial revolution / future thinking skills. But in all this, there is always room for soft core skills. And that is, I guess, my point. And I will end there for now. We'll have more discussions later. And I look forward to the talks of the other two speakers. And of course, your comments, questions, and suggestions during the discussion. And then probably I'll thank you now. Thank you very much. And maraming salamat. I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ariel. That presentation is very rich in very practical suggestions on how you can bring in context into your teaching, the context being the ground for application of the concepts that they will learn. I also like that in your presentation, you look at the environment as a safe place, something that teachers can co-create with students as a safe place for them to do better, not to achieve perfection. Yes, and thank you very much. We will talk more, as you said. We will talk more. There are questions which are relevant, questions in the Q&A which are relevant to your presentation. So thank you very much, Ariel. Let me introduce our next panelist. Our next panelist is Mr. Leo Crisologo. And Leo has been teaching mathematics in the Philippine Science High School main campus since 2008. He has conducted teacher training programs on STEM and the engineering design process for Filipino public school teachers. So he will talk about this shortly, his experience applying this pedagogy. He received his undergraduate and graduate degrees from the University of the Philippines, and he attended the Indiana University of Pennsylvania as a fellow for the Fulbright Distinguished Awards in Teaching Program for International Teachers in 2020. So let me turn over the floor to Leo.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Fred. Okay, so good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for being here. And I'd like to share with you how I designed STEM instruction and my assessments around the limitations of online learning. I am Leo Andrei Crisologo. I am a mathematics teacher from the Philippine Science High School main campus. Just a brief background on my school, the Philippine Science High School. It's, sorry, let me hide my The Philippine Science High School system offers scholarships to students from grade 7 to grade 12 to undertake a special science curriculum through its 16 campuses around the Philippines. This is what Dr. Fred was sharing about the school where he started earlier. This is one way that the Philippines is addressing issues in inequities by constructing campuses around the country and by establishing STEM-oriented schools in all regions in the Philippines. Now, admission to our school is through an aptitude examination that selects for science, mathematics, and verbal skills. Although during this pandemic, the admission criteria has put a higher emphasis on grades. The main campus where I am affiliated with was the first established campus back in 1964. It is located in a diminishing green space in the center of a highly urban area. We admit the top 240 students from the admission process, with the rest going to the regional campuses. We have a significant number of students coming from the regions away from Metro Manila, and they are accommodated in our dormitories. Right now, we're still conducting online classes, but we've started holding pilot face-to-face classes for some students, focusing on laboratory classes. Instruction during this pandemic, of course, has moved online for a lot of us. But for the Philippines, fast and reliable internet is not guaranteed for all our students. Internet quality varies greatly across our country, and this map here indicates the location of my students who are not based in Metro Manila. Normally, they would be on campus in the dormitories, but during this pandemic, they were in their home provinces. Now, a survey conducted among the students on internet connection and resources had the respondents self-reporting that 26% have low internet speeds and 48% have inconsistent internet access. Connectivity is also more expensive in areas where sometimes mobile data is the only option. Now, in STEM education, we teach both the scientific method for acquiring knowledge and explaining phenomena, as well as the engineering design process for finding and developing solutions to problems. Now, our lessons are reinforced when we demonstrate to our students that what we teach them has relevance outside the classroom. And so I applied the engineering design process to the synchronous class aspect of the problem of internet access inequity. So here is the engineering design process, and this is how I approached my problem. The problem was defined as sync classes have large bandwidth requirements on the participants who may be at home sharing their internet with parents and siblings. I explored my limitations as a teacher in terms of time and skills, and I arrived at a plan of recording my lessons and posting them online. This addresses concerns about bandwidth and allows my students to engage with their mathematics lesson at a more convenient time of day. Now, I made several prototype lesson videos to see what works for me and the equipment that I had access to. And through several trials, I ended up using slide decks and learning how to use open broadcasting software, OBS, to record my videos. Then I solicited student feedback to test if the videos were a suitable alternative to synchronous classes. I've tried different tools and essentially moved back and forth between testing and prototyping to improve the product that I was providing my students. I made sure to communicate my intentions and my steps to both my students and my colleagues, the former so they could appreciate the engineering design process, and the latter so that I could solicit feedback from other educators. Now, videos are a solution that addresses the concerns about bandwidth, as YouTube videos take up less bandwidth compared to synchronous meetings. Learning is also more flexible as it allowed my students to engage with their mathematics lessons at a more convenient time of day. Now, the videos are made to be 10 minutes or less to maximize engagement, and on a limited basis can be shipped to students via USB sticks so they can view the videos offline without the need for an internet connection, making the material portable. I should also emphasize that communication is very important in delivering the solution because I had to set the correct expectations with my students so they could engage with the material properly. Now, I don't have the latest count, but there should be more than 100 videos on math lessons posted on my channel. This is around 15 hours worth of videos. Now, moving forward to face-to-face classes, we're looking at this in a few months in the Philippines. The videos that I have invested in, and I really view them as an investment, they can be reused as they are aligned with our curriculum and assessments, and I was able to exercise control over the context and content, something that would not have been possible if I just used other learning materials over the internet. The language I used is personalizing, which is intended to affect the social dimension of learning and allow me to make better connections with my students. I use Filipino, I use English, I code switch, and it's generally a conversational approach, similar to how I teach inside the classroom. Now, I benefited from a school environment that encouraged experimentation and provided opportunities for sharing with what methods work based on the experiences of our teachers during the pandemic. And this investment and environment makes me confident that I can move to a flipped classroom approach in the coming school year when we actually return to actual face-to-face classes. The flipped classroom approach moves the lecture portion of the lesson at home. As their homework, they'll watch videos at home. So class time can now be utilized for learning activities such as assessments, inquiry activities, group activities, and this would allow me as the teacher to supervise and provide immediate feedback. And speaking of assessments, let me share some assessments that were assigned to my students during the pandemic. Applying again the engineering design process and asking which among the skills that we need our students to develop can be maximized given the limitations placed upon us by the pandemic. We had a shift. There was a shift in emphasis towards science communication or SciComm. On our topic on integral calculus, we asked our students to use graphic media to explain how to use numerical methods to approximate integrals. Here's part of a sample output where the students were able to integrate their skills in communication. For the output was meant to be a teaching tool, graphic design, to make the presentation visually interesting while remaining informative. And of course, they had to use some graphic software, which we could consider to be part of a STEM skill set. In this assessment, in the second assessment, students were this time asked to demonstrate their knowledge of geometric transformations by looking around them and taking photographs of patterns in their houses. And the second part of this assessment asked students to construct their own symmetric design. So this is more deliberate compared to the first part. They were expected to communicate how they generated their design and what symmetries can be found in their design. So this tapped into art and illustration skills, with some students having to learn how to use Illustrator software. Okay, and this is an assessment for the current term where students are asked to discover and demonstrate through the use of media how integral calculus can be applied in other fields. The deadline has not yet passed, so I don't have an example to show, but some of my students have already expressed excitement in doing this assessment. And I plan to post some of my student works on my Twitter feed, so maybe I could share that later if you're interested on how these assessments would look like. Now, zooming out of my subject, out of mathematics, I want to look at assessments as venues for integrating STEM. If two subjects can consolidate their assessments to have the students demonstrate what they learned on both subjects through a single assessment, then that could reduce student workload. Although this would entail a lot of planning and coordination between academic units. And I'd like to share that in one of our humanities subjects, the students have to come up with a project that serves a particular community. And my students opted to produce a series of science and mathematics educational YouTube videos, specifically for a grade school in Nueva Ecija. It's a province in the Philippines. And I was asked to provide inputs. Now, their primary task was to provide a meaningful contribution to a community, with STEM knowledge being that contribution. Second idea for integration, as STEM teachers, I think we should also demonstrate proficiency in using STEM tools. such as scientific, mathematical, design, and programming software. In developing my video materials, I have used Desmos, LaTeX for typesetting. I have made programs in Python, and I produced my videos using DaVinci Resolve. These are all available for free. And I made sure to communicate the use of these tools to my students to demonstrate that I'm also learning as I am teaching them. And third, if we ever attempt to do integration activities, I think it's very important to keep the stakes low when exploring these activities. It's very difficult to come up with an integrated assessment which demonstrates learning equally for 2 or more subjects. And it could be discouraging if people will do a lot of work or effort only to have something that provides a shallow demonstration of learning. I think keeping stakes low at the start allows for the students to be confident in doing these assessments, for the teachers to make their mistakes and improve on the assessments without having to compromise student interest and performance. Now, in closing, I would like to end on these 3 tips. First is that we should cultivate a school environment that incentivizes and supports innovation from teachers. There should be a balance between established effective pedagogy while leaving room for experimentation and innovation. Venues for sharing innovations among colleagues should be established. In the Philippine Science High School system, we have an annual teachers conference for this purpose. Second would be that in times of disruptions, such as this pandemic, we should look for opportunities amid the limitations imposed on us. I hope that didn't sound insensitive to the struggles of people, but maybe as teachers, we could identify what STEM-aligned skills can be maximized given our limitations, both for the students and for us teachers. And finally, this was also emphasized by Dr. Ariel, communication. Communicate your intentions to allow your students to give you feedback if your stated goal is being accomplished, if the problem that you intended to solve is being addressed. Should cultivate an environment of communication with your colleagues, both to share knowledge and gather feedback to refine your methods. So thank you very much, and I look forward to interacting with you during the question answer portion of this webinar.
Thank you very much, Leo. And I like in your presentation that you model how the engineering design process is done. You showed how it can be done to solve a problem in your own practice as a teacher. But I'm sure you've also brought this approach in integrating your lessons in math as you have described. Thank you very much, Leo. So we'll talk more about your experiences later. So allow me to introduce our next speaker, our next panelist. And our next panelist is Mr. David Chak. He is the co-founder of Arus Academy in Malaysia. He leads the advocacy work and content development for STEAM education and media literacy in Arus Academy. Some of David's work with Arus has been widely used in Malaysia, such as the National Syllabus textbook for Year 5 Design and Technology. He is also the chief content developer for the Malaysian Ministry of Education's free coding education platform, which has seen close to 1 million views since its launch. So we welcome David, and let's hear his presentation.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Frederick, for the introduction. So I just want to follow up on something that Dr. Frederick has mentioned earlier on about how STEM education is something that's very new around the region. So today what I'll be talking about is in a more national way of how that whole STEM education agenda is happening in Malaysia, and how we in Arus as a social enterprise help the Ministry of Education to achieve that goal. So yeah, so in Malaysia, the STEM education has always been a very important part of our Malaysian education policy since about 60 years ago. In Malaysia, we are trying to achieve this what we call the 60-40 ratio, where 60% of Malaysian students will take up STEM education, and the 40% will take up other kind of education. For the past 60 years, we are still chasing this goal. It's not easy to achieve, and 60 years is a very long time, right? A lot of things has happened since then, these 60 years. So one of the biggest thing that has happened is that we have went from using technology to actually making technology. When you talk about STEM in about 20 years, 30 years ago, it has not so much about computer science, nothing much about data and all that, but 30 years later on, this is one of the core things that we do. So with this new development of technology, there comes new subject in school, new assessment, and new paradigm, new ways of thinking of how to teach STEM. So as everyone knows, right, in any kind of education system, when you have big shift like this, there's going to be what we call a systemic shock. Teachers, students, they have to learn to adjust to this new system. So the key question is that how can we cushion, right, the system for such a big systemic shock? And in Arus, we have been working with the Ministry of Education on several of our projects to help to cushion that system. So I'm going to share with you what we have done exactly, and hopefully you can get some idea of how you can be cushioned from this systemic shock that's happening all over the world. So these three things will be, the first one is having a very structured lesson modules. Second one is to have PBL focused textbook and also assessment. And the last one is online learning portals. So I'll be going through each one of these and give brief example. So the first one is the structured lesson modules. So back when the new syllabus was announced about 6 or 7 years ago, a lot of teachers, they have to pick up this new subject, they have to pick up the new content so they can teach in the classroom. We understand that while we in Malaysia, we are putting a lot of effort to train teachers, upskill teachers in this area, but we also know that perhaps the teachers need more support. So with that, we actually work with the Malaysia Digital Economy Corporation as well as the Ministry of Education to create computer science modules, computer science and also design technology modules to help the teachers. So each of these modules is designed to bring teachers or students up from 0 to hero. A lot of teachers, they are being tasked to teach this new subject in way. We do give them training, however, the training might not be sufficient. So we created this lesson modules so teachers can use in the classroom. And to be honest with you, whatever we do in this module is nothing spectacular. We are going back to the basic. We focus on this 5-step lesson. So the first one is to have this set induction, something to keep the students interested in the topic. We make connection with previously learned concept. So in one of the modules that we make for the ministry for the Form 4 grade 11 computer science education is to have this for them to learn about computer science and learn about arrays. Arrays is a kind of data structure that you use in computer science. So we started the topic talking about how about how to record a football match score. What if there are 10 scores? You need to create 10 variables. What if there's 100 scores, n score? So from there, we get the students to think about, what is the best way for me to store such a large information. Then we talk about the new concept. This is array. This is what array does and how we can use it. We give them examples, give them analogies so they can understand the topic. Then we proceed in doing a guided practice. So we do together that particular topic. This is how you write a program to manipulate an array. And then we get the students to do their own exercise, to do their own coding practice. And lastly, we recap back the lesson. We go back to the original understanding. So now we have been doing this thing at the beginning of the curriculum because teachers need a very structured way of learning the new content so they can teach the new content, right? So that's the first way we are helping the Ministry of Education, by creating very structured lesson modules for teachers to use immediately in the classroom. Second one is the PBL focused textbook. So this is something that comes later on. We got the opportunity to write the textbook for the RBT, Reka Bentuk Technology, which in English stands for Design Technology subject for the Year 5 students. The textbook that we write is actually for Chinese school use, but I'll just briefly explain to you what happens in every chapter. So one of the things that we want to do in the subject is for the students to be able to practice the skill that they have learned. We want every chapter to be problem-based learning. So as you can see here, this is one of the chapter on renewable energy. So we start by telling them, this is what's happening in the interior part of Malaysia. They are not connected to electrical grid. So therefore, we talk about, renewable energy can be useful in this scenario. And then we walk the students through, they are thinking of making a project. We show them how they can do the steps. You draw sketches, to evaluate the sketches, to pick the best design. You think about how you can do the project, and then you actually make the project, calculating the cost, and finally presenting the project to their classmates. So we demonstrate this whole process of solving a problem, just like what Mr. Liao said just now on engineering design process. You come with the problem, think about the solution, creating a solution, presenting a solution. We also want the students to not just follow the textbook example in a spoon-feeding manner. So in every chapter, we always include one final practice where we do not give him an answer. We give him a problem statement. So in this chapter, the problem statement is about how they want to keep themselves cool in the jungle when they are camping. So we have this problem, and then we have the question to guide them through the processes. We also know, and as mentioned earlier on as well, the limitation may be there. So we also created programs that's out of school, so as students get to do what they have learned. We actually conducted national level innovation competition last year, specifically focusing on year 5 students, year 5 and year 6 students, so they can create a solution based on the problem that they see. I'm going to show you one of the product that one of the participants, actually one of the national winner, Austin. He's 11 years old, and he actually created a project using microbit, which is a small microcontroller, to solve the problem of aggressive driver. He went through our lesson, he discussed with his teacher, with his parent support. He actually created this project, and he can confidently present his solution. Where this is a system that you put onto the car, that it can warn, it can warn the driver when you're driving aggressively. It tracks the data, send the data to the road transport department, so that they can deduct your points or give you extra points. So this is a project that is entirely imagined and created by this 11 years old boy. And he's not the only one. In this national competition that we do, we actually received close to 3,000 student submissions from over Malaysia. And this is just one of the best ones that we can find. There are a lot more where that's coming from. So final step that we do is that in light of the recent pandemic that is affecting everyone, that also causes us to have this another big shift. We actually work with the Ministry of Education to create this online learning platform. We work with the Ministry of Education, a local telco company, as well as UNICEF, to create this online learning platform where students can learn computer science education virtually with the teacher or without teacher support. Right, the links up there, futureskills.moe-dr.edu.my. So on this platform, they get to learn microbit, they get to learn HTML, learn Python, learn SQL, and they get to track their progresses through a simple dashboard. Not only that, a teacher can also assign the work to the students and track the students' progress as well. So on this Learning Future Skill for All platform, we have close to 1 million access as of last year. We have 34,000 students that's on it. For a MOOC, we actually have a 40% completion rate, so that is actually quite something to celebrate on. And in this year, we are going even bigger. We want to make sure that students in the disconnected group, those who have no internet access, also get to learn coding. So we're actually creating tabletop games, board game for students to learn coding. We're creating more competition, and we are going to integrate global citizenship education into our content. That leads us to our second program that we work with the Ministry of Education, which is the GSET Learning Portal. So GSET stands for Global Citizenship Education, where we want the students to be able to learn about their role in this world and what they can do as a global citizen to make this world a better place. So we have about 15 to 16 self-guided learning modules up there. I just want to show 3 that is very, very highly relevant to STEM education. So these 3 modules are entirely within our national syllabus. We want to make sure learning stays relevant to the students. Why just learn about factoring squares and cubes, where you can learn this mathematical concept within the context of food security in the world? Why just learn about air particles, where you can learn about air particles that is within the context of climate change and also air pollution? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring STEM into global citizenship education. We believe that just purely teaching STEM would not help the students to become better global citizens. We have to make sure they are themselves not just a STEM person, but also a STEM person with a global mindset. So to sum it up, there are 3 things that we did to help the Ministry of Education in preparing the nation for a 60-40 enrollment goal and to prepare Malaysia for a digital economy. There are structured lesson modules, PBL-focused textbook and assessment, as well as online learning quarters. So one final remark I want to leave with you guys is that, like I said earlier on, Malaysia has had this goal since 60 years ago. And 60 years, many things has changed. The STEM that we teach has changed. How we teach also have to change with the changing time. So the key question we should be asking ourselves is, how can we support and empower the generation of students, learners, and also teachers for such a big change? And I believe that whatever we are doing now in this webinar, that's a very good start, that we get to share best practices so that we can support each other in preparing our generation for a more digitally more connected world. And with that, I will end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David, for your sharing. And I like that in your presentation, you brought that question of the aims of STEM education, and you bring the pairing of STEM education with global citizenship. You talked about support that are provided to the teachers as they venture into STEM education, and that's really, really very important. I'm sure we have questions on this later as we go into our Q&A. Thank you very much, David, for your sharing. Okay, I think it's well, I think we can bring in our two other panelists, Leo and Ariel, right? And we have, as we begin our Q&A, we will be looking at questions in the Q&A box. But let's just look at the results for our poll. Okay, so we have 4 questions, and the question is, which question is most challenging for designing STEM learning experiences? Okay, and the overwhelming concern for our attendees this afternoon is how to integrate core ideas from the various disciplines. So this question of bringing in or crossing the boundaries of our respective disciplines. Okay, so perhaps we can start on that question. Perhaps you can highlight some ideas that you shared in your presentation that answers to this question. How do you bring in the core ideas from the disciplines into STEM teaching? Would like to, Ariel, please go ahead.
Relates to what I mentioned a while ago. In our case, because I'm teaching college students in our math, let's say in our math class, it's a course for different students from different fields. They come across from different areas of studies, different programs. So I get to hear from them. What are actually there will always be a sharing part in my class. I want to get to know their experiences, what mathematics background, and then what do they actually study in their own degree programs. So I guess that is fortunate in my case. But then for, let's say you are in a high school student, that some of your students are just in a certain subject, the best way to do this is really to talk with your other colleagues or practitioners. I think Leo also mentioned this. You communicate not just with people from your own subjects, you communicate with people from others. That's the best way really to get new ideas. And also one thing, also read books that are not really the technical books, let's say about let's say mathematics. There are lots of textbooks in maths, but then also read books about mathematics, not really the mathematics content, but then mathematics as an idea, or even in the sciences. That you really have to do a bit of reading, I guess, or probably now you can do it online via YouTube, I guess. But then the best way is really to communicate with other practitioners beyond your field.
All right. Thank you, Ariel. Leo, would you like to chime in on that?
Okay. I think one of the challenges in finding ways to integrate is that it has to be allowed or approved and encouraged by the school administration. Like it's very difficult for just to, and coming from a high school perspective where we don't have a lot of control on what can be taught, right? So it's easy to talk about two teachers discussing how to merge their requirements, but this is an environment that has to be cultivated, because it's hard to just come up to a teacher and talk to them and say, let's try to integrate, right? Unless there is an incentive coming from the top for these things to be possible. We have problems in having our topics aligned. We've tried with, let's say, the physics teachers from our school, and we find out that what we're teaching them this techniques in mathematics that they needed last year. So we need to fix the alignment first. So perhaps there has to be a lot of support, and the people from the top, from the administration, have to recognize the importance of integration. Because if I am just to approach my fellow teachers and work on integration, that's possible, and we could actually have something that works, and I could put it up on conference or something. But it will be difficult to sustain if there is no institutional support for integrating activities or lessons or assessments in not just in the STEM subjects, but also maybe in the humanities subjects.
All right, thank you, Leo. So the idea of school support to initiate and sustain integration across the various disciplines. I'd like to also hear David's thoughts on this, because I imagine situating STEM within issues of global citizenship, in concerns about food and pollution in urban spaces would involve integrating across various disciplines. So how do you approach the creation of the learning modules for these topics?
I think when we talk about supporting the teachers in this regard, right, we have to look at it from different level. So the first level is obviously there needs to be a national level kind of support, but that may be very difficult to achieve, right? A country is so big, education system in whichever country is like a giant elephant. By the time it has turned around, it's already a different world. So it would be good if the country actually works with. In my case, for example, we actually work with Ministry of Education, even though we are a private entity, to have this kind of PPP, public-private partnership, to sort of create lesson resources to be used by other teachers. That is the first way, right? The national kind of system. Second way is that within the state, within the district, the teachers should form some kind of collaborative group. In the education term, we call it PLC, Professional Learning Circle, so that you can share resources among yourself. One of the things that we did last year, so we created a lot of resources online for teachers, right? Yeah. But we also crowdsource resources from teachers. So we actually curate a few lesson resource bank where we get teachers to submit their best resources, and then for other teachers to go and access all these things. We understand teachers might be busy in planning their lesson. We also know that teachers might be limited to the scope of their general knowledge, but many hands make great work, when you can leverage on what everyone's know. So that's the second part. And the third part, which I believe is the easiest way of doing things, is that the teacher must work with teachers within their school. One example, so before I do Arus Academy, before I started Arus Academy, I was actually a school teacher for 7 years. I used to teach geography. So I know my subject is not traditionally a STEM subject, but I also know that, for example, when I teach Form 1 geography, they learn about the earth, they learn about different geographical features, mountains, hill, tectonic plate, and all that. I also happen to know that in Form 1 science, that's what they're learning in the earth system as well, because I also teach Form 1 science. So I actually work with the teacher who teaches science to actually do sort of synchronize the way we teach things. So the students can see, oh, I'm not just learning earth in geography, I'm learning earth in science. Imagine if the whole school can have a culture like that. You just have this 1 week or this 1 month that we all teach similar topic. Students should be surrounded by all these things so they can keep reinforcing it. Sort of like creating an echo chamber that students feel that this is not something that's isolated. We have to know in the adult world, right? In the working world, knowledge is never in a silo. You never just do one thing in your job. It's always, when you do this thing, you will have other things in it. So that's where we are trying to create this awareness there. And to do that, another thing that's also very, very important is for the school teachers to also link up whatever they're teaching with what's happening around the world. I give you one good example. You're talking about, for example, the current conflict that's happening. You can use it to talk about mathematics, you can use it to talk about science, you can talk about humanity. There are a lot of ways for you to make use of what's happening around the world, the current issues, to actually bring in STEM for that. You can be talking about, when you are having a missile, the projectile, that's actually a mathematical equation. Or, what makes a nuclear bomb, for example, that is a science concept. What happens the last time a nuclear bomb is used, that is a history topic. So it's just that teachers have to be creative. Teachers have to be, if they are not creative enough, then it's fine. You just want teachers who are creative to create this network of support.
Right. So David, I was thinking about this idea of STEM education or integrating across the disciplines as really very revolutionary because we are not, as you said, working in silos, working in our own disciplines, but we're looking at the world from a more holistic view. All right. Okay, I think we can move on to one question in the Q&A, which is, I think, very, very critical. So there is this perception that STEM is limited only to, sophisticated science instruments, use of ICT, or, advanced technologies. Can you say something about this, and how can we? What are the specific experiences that you have that say that STEM is really accessible for all? It can be made accessible. You don't need technology to do STEM teaching. David, you might, because I'm wondering, because you talked about coding earlier, right? And so I was thinking, what might be an alternative to that? Because you need gadgets for all these things, right? Yeah.
So that's also something that we are exploring this year. Under the Future Skills program, we do know we work with schools in the interior parts of Malaysia, where they have very limited electricity supply, they have very limited internet. So we are actually creating a board game for them to learn coding. So there are new things like that we can just explore. I think the one thing that we have to always keep reminding ourselves is that, when it comes to education, we have to be creative in terms of resources that we have. You have to work within. I believe it was you see my note. I think it was Mr. Leo who said that we have to look for opportunities within your limitation. So we know that in the rural parts of Malaysia, they may not have internet. That's fine. We bring coding education in the form of board game for you. We even have videos. We plan to have the videos uploaded to a pen drive where they can just turn it on to their TV. So there are many ways of doing things in a low cost way. So saying that I don't have resource as an excuse to not do STEM, I think that's an excuse. I think if you want in the local language, you have this saying, right? When there's will, there's way. There are many ways to do things, and if you are struggling with that, I'm happy to be your bouncing idea partner to talk about how you can teach STEM in a very low cost. So we even have programs that the kids build bridges using recycled material. That is a STEM activity. So you don't need fancy toy, you don't need fancy equipment. All you need is to have the imagination and also the heart to actually do STEM activities for your students.
Right. Yes. David, thank you very much. Perhaps Leo or Ariel might want to share your thoughts on this.
I think there have been some small organizations or institutions that are providing educational materials to be used by students for a low cost. For example, I know in our school, since we're doing this online, we tried to source some. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the fold scope. It's like a microscope set up with plastic lenses that the students can assemble at home using cardboard. So they have cut-ups that they can cut, and they stick the lens somewhere so that the correct focal distance is correctly set up, and they can use their setup as a as a microscope, and the teachers can then guide the students through investigations of using this inexpensive equipment that perhaps the school can provide to the students to facilitate their learning. Recently, we have a festival of science where where the students were asked to use lenses, use different lenses, so they could build their own. I think it's a telescope. I was just able to see this from outside. I was not part of this activity, but they constructed the telescope, and I think they were able to do some simple observations, astronomy observations, using this telescope that they assembled at home. So it is difficult, but and it will take some effort for teachers to come up with these activities because you have to test it out on your own. You have to make sure that these materials are inexpensive and accessible to the students. But I guess if once you find such activity, then you go there to be able to maximize the limitations that are given to you by whatever, by a lack of resources, by distance, by a lack of information. And like David said, you go with creativity if it is possible, or collaborate with people who do have that creativity. Thank you.
So teaching STEM requires creativity and resourcefulness among STEM teachers. Ariel, perhaps you might want to
Of course, I would
share. Yeah.
Government and university support, but then of course, sometimes it's difficult to rely on. In our case, there is this laboratory kits that physics students need. Or so probably laptops that are some of our majors need. What we need is to look for support from our alumni, from our graduates. Our institute actually created some sort of support program for our major students. We contacted alumni and then our graduates, and then some of them are really willing to share their own devices. But then that is just at our level. But then university-wide, there's actually a bigger program that really gives gadgets to students. They even provide really laptops, tablets, so that they can really proceed with the current setup. I'd like to say that it has really to come. It should have government and university support. But really, in our own case, as teachers, it might come late. So really, we have to adjust a bit and really make what can we do with the current setup. If our activity then requires laboratory or some probably computers, how can I adjust that so that the students, even if they are still waiting for support, can still perform the activities? We really have to adjust ingenuity, I guess, and as you mentioned. Yes.
Right.
Can I just touch on one more point when we talk about resources, right? So the learning portals that I've shown you guys just now on Future Skill, as well as the Global Citizenship Education Platform, believe it or not, those websites are made using Google site only. We have not used any extra technology. It's just plain old Google site. We want to show to the teachers that, you don't need fancy technology. You don't need fancy programmer. All you need to do is to, have the idea to create online learning material, and that's it. So to the teachers out there, if you're looking to create simple lesson module for your students, and if you're not comfortable making video like Mr. Leo, you can just make Google site. Google site is an excellent way to create a synchronous learning material for your students.
Right.
And it's free.
Yeah. Okay, so we've been covering so far in our Q&A, the question of integrating across disciplines, and then we talked about resources just now. And some of the questions that I find in the Q&A relate to appropriateness of teaching STEM at different levels. So we have questions about, can you teach STEM in the lower levels, and I mean among primary school students, or even in kindergarten or preschool? And yeah, so what kind of what kind of activities might be a way of showcasing STEM integration at the levels? This is a very interesting question because I talked with someone who was interested to attend our conversations this afternoon. He's a an elementary school teacher. And so this might be, a relevant question for not only for him, but for some of our audience.
Can I start, Dr. Fred?
Go ahead, Leo.
Okay, so we have to go back to the question is, what do you mean when we say we will teach STEM? So to young students. So I think you have to come from perspective of distilling it into, when you teach STEM, you want the students to understand both the scientific process, that's how we discover and we know and we verify what we know, and the engineering design process as a way to solve problems. Now, of course, you can teach science as early as kindergarten in the students discovering about flowers, about plants, about little animals. And you can phrase the questions in such a way that you'll emphasize the scientific method and understand on why we could say that a certain thing is true scientifically. Now, for the other aspect, we could give challenges to our students and have them work with simple things to solve a simple problem. We don't have to specify to the students, no, okay, we're teaching you STEM, right? No, it can be part of play. But what they're doing is they're trying to solve something, they're trying to accomplish something. And then maybe processing the activity afterwards, you could just talk about how did we solve that problem? First, we talked about what problem are we solving? What did you try? Did it work? What did you do different on your next time? So it could be couched in play. It doesn't have to be very technical. And you can build up on that. And I think that's still STEM. That's still part of STEM learning. Working with how you know that something's true and working with how to solve problems. Thank you.
Right. Very interesting idea, embedding it in play, for our younger learners.
If I may add on to that, Mr. Liu mentioned a very important word, the word play. So for those of you educators who are interested, right, you can actually look it up on Lego Foundation. They actually have this whole guidebook on how do you create play-based learning. So STEM, you can break it down into STEM way of thinking, STEM knowledge, and also the STEM concept, right? So when you talk about formal learning, it doesn't be very formal learning. For younger children, it can just come in the form of play-based learning. STEM toys, for example, when they build kinetic sand, there's a scientific process behind it. So I think if you're interested to do STEM education for younger children as young as kindergarten, look up play-based learning. They have some great tips and methodology to make learning fun and in a more play kind of way, so the children don't feel that they are learning rather than just having fun.
I would like to comment about that part about play, but then probably I'll first address the. I mentioned to you that I'm really into gaming. I mentioned a while ago that I'm into gaming, but probably later. When should we? How do we introduce them to, let's say, to kindergarten or earlier in the curriculum? Actually, I always ask my students when at the start of the semester, what is the first thing that they learn about mathematics? And usually they tell that it's about numbers and shapes. But then when I share to them, in my experience, it's actually not numbers and shapes. My first experience with as far as I can remember from school, is about colors, classifying which is red, which is green, which is blue. And classification is an important skill, not just in almost every subject, especially the sciences, and then also in mathematics. You have to classify objects, and that is a skill that you learn later on, but then you build up on that. One example that I always give them is about a circle. Right now, at our level, at our age, we already know that a circle, or probably we are familiar with the definition of a circle, a set of points equidistant from a fixed point. But then I'll ask my students, when did you learn? When did you first learn that? What is your actual first experience with learning a circle? It's actually identifying objects from around them without the notion of these things. And as you go onto the curriculum, going to, of course, high school and college, you build up on that. We are not realizing it, but then from those simple activities, classifying objects, identifying what's a circle, what is a square, we are building STEM on that. Leo mentioned identifying flowers around us. Actually, we build on that, and later on, we develop more. Before you can identify the parts of a flower, students first need to recognize what is a flower. Even if you give them the actual definition of a flower, they won't understand it unless they already know what is a flower. And it starts really at preschool. We are really building on top of it as you go on. And actually, students are surprised, and then they realize, oh, of course, yeah. When I first encountered a circle, I don't know what is a center, what is a radius. It's just a circle, an object. And probably, I hope we can realize that we are actually building STEM, not just STEM, all of these higher skills in the curriculum, but then we are building from that. Okay, probably I'll end there for now. Okay.
Thank you, Ariel. So based on what you guys have shared, so this idea of making the lessons or the STEM lessons really like relevant to the experiences of the students. For younger learners, it will be learning through play. For our high schoolers, possibly tapping on the interests that they have outside school. So all these approaches to teaching STEM would include also focusing on problems that they can solve. So another strategy would also be looking at some connections with other subjects. I'd like us to talk about this idea of integration of STEM across content areas, into the humanities. David talked about himself being a geographer. Having training in geography, right? And using that as a platform to also integrate for STEM. But we have some questions about, like, I'm an English teacher, and I also want to integrate STEM in my teaching. How might an English teacher, come up with this integration of STEM?
Probably I'll start. It can be for English, let's say, it can be as simple as do reading activities. Instead of reading as short stories or poems, maybe you can also integrate in your class reading popular science article and ask comprehension question about that. That is one incorporating STEM in an English class. And as I mentioned a while ago, you can also do interviews. Ask your students to interview people from around you that are STEM practitioners. Do reporting in class about this. You can start with that. You do not have to put a laboratory or a computer or a calculator inside an English class, but then your activities can involve STEM concepts, not really the actual STEM objects, but in the concepts that are in STEM, and that is easy to do. Or probably ask your student to watch some videos on YouTube. Probably, of course, you should have checked it first, but that is really more on the sciences, and then allow them to come up with a write-up about that. It can be done in that way. That is just one way. Maybe the other speakers can share more. And I think David in what he shown a while ago, it really goes beyond STEM. What he was showing a while ago.
Thank you, Ariel.
I think one of the things, I think one of the things that we also need to think about is that when we talk about STEM education, right? It's more than just learning about why the sun rises from the east every day. It's also the process of figuring out why, the whole scientific thinking process, and that itself is your way of thinking, and that can be put in language. Like what Dr. Ariel saying about how can be reading language subject. I will even go one step further. What if I give you an article with empty spaces and you have to figure out what is the right words to put in it through a scientific method? So you try and test the word. That can be that way. In computer science, there's this concept computer science thinking, CT skill. There's this concept called abstraction, which you look at the big picture and figuring out, how do I abstract the main idea from it? Abstracting main idea, that is an essential language skill actually. So when we talk about integrating STEM into language subject, for example, it can also come in the form of the thinking process, the logic process. How do we create this kind of, scientific mind when it comes to language, digesting the language, using the right word, abstracting information, so it goes beyond that. Yeah.
So the idea that they're really intertwined, how can you learn science without using language? But I'd like to thank you, David. But I'd like to ask Leo, because some of the assessments that he shared earlier were about focusing on science communication. So that's a very explicit integration between STEM and language use.
Okay, so I was thinking about it from the sense that me as a STEM teacher, I'm trying to integrate along with the other humanities. Now, how would they be able to do it in the opposite direction as an English or humanities teacher? How can they work with STEM? And I guess I apologize for this, but I might be asking them to do a bit more work, a bit more effort on their end. Because, for example, on my one of my experiences is if I want to look at integrating the humanities into my course, I will tend to read up more. Like, for example, there's this mathematician, his name is Galois. I'm sure Ariel knows him. He has a very dramatic and romantic life. He was able to do a lot of things mathematically that will not be understood by high school students, but he had a love affair, he engaged in a duel, and he died when he was, I think he was 21. And that's a great story, a very interesting story. And I could integrate the drama, the writing, the story aspect of that in the mathematics lesson, should if I choose to. So maybe if I have to get myself interested in the non-STEM aspects of the STEM topics that I'm interested in, so that I could include the humanities part into my lessons. So I guess if I am a teacher of English and I am actively looking for opportunities to involve STEM into my assessments, then I should read up on stories involving STEM. So I would know STEM practitioners, scientists, engineers, or concepts or ideas, so that I could come up, or I would be able to select which portions would be would mesh well with whatever topic I'm teaching right now. Because it will be difficult if I am soliciting ideas from the outside, and it's very difficult to make it work compared to when these ideas come from you yourself, right? Because you're interested in this, like Dr. Ariel, Dr. Ariel, he is interested in gaming. I'm sure it would be easier for him to find mathematics concepts in gaming that he could share with the students. So I guess that also goes the same way for the humanities teachers. They have to find something in the STEM fields, in the STEM subjects that would interest them, and they could share that same interest and enthusiasm with their students. And then they could find these venues for integration.
Right. Thank you very much, Leo. We've covered quite a lot of bases in our discussion, but there are more questions coming in, and unfortunately, we won't be able to address all of these questions. But as mentioned by Vignesh earlier, there's a Facebook learning group. So these questions could be possibly addressed in that platform. Yeah, I wish we had more time, but maybe just one last question, and I'm picking this question because it's intriguing. That was my first reaction. But I also want to have this as a point of reflection because all of us, the four of us are here having a conversation and promoting STEM in a particular way. And one question that I saw in our Q&A is that are there any unintended results as we emphasize this idea of STEM? It's a difficult question, I know, but it's important to be reflective also about our advocacy. So anyone wants to start, share his thoughts about this? Are we all stumped by the question?
Probably it's because of the qualifier unintended result. Because usually, as I would want to look at the intended result, and sometimes we overlook that. Wait,
Yes.
I don't know if I should probably the. I'm still thinking at the moment.
Can I try? Can I try
Sure,
addressing
Leo.
this question? Okay, I think when we talk about STEM and we share pictures or images of STEM integration, sometimes we get to see 3D printers come in and I don't know, design thinking and a lot of these of gadgets, 3D printers. That's the image of STEM that I see. And I think it's a great way to work with STEM, STEM integration. You'll be able to build something and you can connect it with scientific concepts, engineering concepts. So the 3D printer is a great image of that. But I think it sort of gives the impression that STEM has to have high technology tools, or when you talk about the science part, has to go very deep. But I think that's a misconception. Maybe that's an unintended consequence of developing a misconception about STEM, that you need equipment, you need materials, you need expensive materials, or that it even has to be something explicitly taught that this is STEM. This is different from biology, chemistry, and physics. But I'm looking at STEM as a framework of learning. Like it's an addition to the scientific method for verifying what is true and how we learn what is knowledge. It is it's process. So there might be a misconception that, oh, we're a small school in a poor province in the Philippines or somewhere, and we won't be able to do STEM because we don't have equipment. But I think what can be done to address that misconception is to maybe really train the teachers, because part of the problem, I think, in learning is that the misconceptions will get transferred over to the students, and it will continue the cycle of not understanding what we want students to accomplish with STEM. So maybe we could take in these teachers and have them understand what STEM education is so they could better communicate their needs. And I think David talked about, and Ariel also talked about, gathering resources and sharing these with places with limited resources. So if we are able to educate our teachers on what STEM education is and what they would need, they be able to communicate and understand their needs. So when they do ask for help and when people are willing to provide materials and resources, this would be aligned with what should be learned by the students in these areas. So yeah, maybe that an unintended consequence of always talking about it is a misconception of what it actually is.
Right. So it's possibly a different image of on what STEM means or what it involves.
And it could be damaging if we persist in thinking of STEM as something that needs expensive equipment.
I'm sorry, David or Ariel. David?
Wait.
Yeah.
I think. Oh, sorry, Ariel, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. It's better for to end this one. But I think we can integrate. We want to integrate STEM in different disciplines and also different disciplines in our classroom. But then at some point we have to ask, where do we draw the line and end the motivation, interesting part? Because by the end of our before we end our class, we have still content that we have to deliver. Maybe an unintended consequence of this is that part that there is actually content, and do we delegate that outside the class? Do we simply let people read it online or watch in some videos, and then we just do all this discussion, interesting, incorporating stuff in the class? Maybe that is one problem that we have to put a balance. And even in the assessments, I'm sharing you creative things that you can do in class, but at some point, you have to give score to the content if the students actually know it, or if they have the competencies, or they can actually do the laboratory activities or the actual computation. So I guess maybe that is the part that an unintended consequence of this. We need to draw a line at some point, and we need to have a careful balance of content being interesting and being motivated in class. I probably that is one that I can really think of, because I experienced that, especially right now online. We are going to do some activities online, discuss that, to wait for some minutes before the students reply to my question. And at some point, I realized I only have 5 minutes to cover 20 more points. Anyway.
Right. Thank you, Ariel.
I think the question to this, the answer to this question can be answered in 3 different ways. So the first one is one of the unintended consequences that I can see. I'm not sure whether this is happening across the region, but in Malaysia, at least, is what I see is that we sort of reserve STEM learning for the brightest and best students in the school. And I personally believe that that will actually widen the education gap between those students who are more academically inclined towards those that's not so academically inclined. And when that happens, that will also create this wealth gap when they grow up and into the workforce. So I think one thing that we also have to cautiously remind ourselves is that STEM is for everyone. It's not just for the best and brightest, it's actually for everyone. And if you give them an opportunity to learn something in a way that they feel comfortable learning in, they can do amazing things. So that's something that we have to keep at the back of our head. Our mindset, the way we perceive, who can do STEM, who cannot do STEM, could actually influence the student's outcome. So we have to really remember that. The second thing is a bit more spiritual and philosophical. When we are chasing STEM, right, we also shouldn't forget about the humanities part, about the social science part. I saw someone talking about how, if STEM just want to create suffering in the world with the wars and all that, but we also remember STEM brought us medicine. STEM brought us, vaccine. STEM brought us, to places and advancement that we have never seen before. So we have to balance the STEM learning with the human side of things. It's not just learning. Learning is not just for the brain, but also for the heart and for the soul. And my personal experience is that I am a very scientific guy. But when I was taking science courses in university, that's when I realized that, science, it's at the very end of science, at the purest of science, you actually find spirituality in it. You find things are just, it's just incredible. You begin to appreciate the beauty of nature. You begin to appreciate, the spiritual side of things. So that's something also we should also incorporate, also promote within our students. And the third part is obviously on that whole assessment versus learning, content, all that. One thing we have to remember is that it's an entirely different world now. I may not know how high the Everest mountain is, but I can tell you with mathematics how I can calculate the height Mount Everest. So perhaps we should also move towards not so much of memorizing facts, but rather what you can do with the knowledge. So it's something that perhaps I believe can be the bridge between mastering content and mastering the ways to do things. So that's my 2 cents on this very philosophical topics on, what do we lose out if we focus too much on STEM.
Right. Thank you very much, David, for sharing your thoughts about this. Also, thank you, Ariel and Leo. I have learned a lot from your sharing this afternoon. We've covered things from pedagogical strategies to issues about integration, and practical things like how do you bring down STEM for younger learners. So we thank you very much for your time, and we thank the HEAD Foundation for bringing us together to have this conversation. So we turn over the floor to Vignesh. Thank you very much for everyone's participation this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Frederick. Excuse me, and thank you again to our panelists, Leo, David, and Ariel. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. I really enjoyed listening to your experiences, the best practices that you shared, and the Q&A was a really enjoyable session for me. I learned a lot with your sharing, and I hope our audience members did too. I think our last question was very interesting. What is the unintended consequence of focusing too much on STEM education? And I think there's a huge conversation that we can have around that. And hopefully through this series, we can continue. But let's hope we can continue that conversation on our Facebook learning group, Teaching, Leading, Learning. A conversation that I am going to take part in. I have my own thoughts about what is the unintended consequences of focusing excessively on STEM education. Are there any unintended consequences? Is it detrimental? Unintended consequences are not always bad. So join me on that Facebook learning group. Hear my thoughts, hear that of my friends, hear that of our panelists, our moderator, and others who are part of the community. Ladies and gentlemen, as we come to an end of our first session, I'd just like to quickly address an issue that was raised in the Q&A, an administrative issue. It was asked about registration. Yes, you would have to register individually for each of the 3 sessions. If you have registered for this session, the links will be made available in the chat box soon. Register for the 2nd and 3rd session to be a part of it. As I shared in the beginning, you have to be part of all 3 sessions to be eligible for a certificate of participation. Not only have you to attend, but please do sit through the session. Zoom is a fantastic tool. We can see how long you were in each session. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being a part of today's webinar series. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you learned something from our panelists from Malaysia and Philippines. Join us again next week, same time, same place, as we focus a bit more on how we can support our teachers in developing and preparing them to teach STEM. We take the perspective from teacher educators from Thailand, from Indonesia, and the Philippines as they share best practices and their own personal experiences. So join us, register with the link available, and I look forward to welcoming you again next week. Thank you very much and have a pleasant day.